what you're mostly looking forward to getting out of today's live. I'm so excited. Me and Diane have been wanting to do a live together for quite some time now, so the timing finally aligned. So please let me know your name, where you're joining in from, and if you want to let me know what you're hoping to get from today's live. I'm going to be pinning the topic right now for us really quickly. Let's please work. There we go. Beautiful. I see Debbie. Hello, Debbie from New York. Ben from San Diego. Melbourne, Australia. Hi, Andrew. Vanessa from Silmar, California. I'm streaming from Los Angeles, California, so we are close. Tamara from Ontario, Canada. Thank you guys for being here. Alyssa from Texas. Welcome, Alyssa. Hi, Kristen from Vancouver. Vancouver is a place I've just been so eager to go travel to, hopefully soon. Daniela from Trinidad and Tobago. Beautiful. Kasim from Pakistan. Hi, Kasim. Thank you, Vanessa. I appreciate that. Abby from Texas. Angelica from the Bay Area, California. Beautiful. Hello from California. Samantha. Fernando from Florida. Cassidy from South Africa. Naz. Yesenia. Diane, I will bring you in as soon as I introduce our lovely theme. I will request you, so you'll be able to see my request and then just accept. So give me 2 minutes. Hedda from Sweden. Juliana from Orange County. Let's see. Michelle from Montreal. Beautiful. Please continue to let me know your names and where you're joining in from. I'm going to introduce the topic today and my beautiful guest, Diane. We're going to be talking about attachment styles and how our different attachment tendencies have been showing up, particularly during this time where so many of us are under such high amounts of stress. For those of you that don't know me, that might be joining in for the first time from Diane's beautiful community, thank you for being here. Welcome. I'm a relationship coach. I work also particularly around attachment theory work and boundaries work, and that's where my love affair with Diane began, because we both are very we share a love for attachment theory very deeply. Most of my posts are about relationships, intimate relationships, how to really become more aware of our attachment tendencies so that we can really show up in a way to create more secure, functioning, and supportive and nourishing relationships. And as for my lovely guest, Diane, she is a amazing psychologist who works with attachment theory as well and specializes with cognitive behavioral therapy, which is really about working with the thoughts of the mind, and she helps people challenge their negative thoughts into creating positive and more healthy thoughts. And I'm going to bring her in and let her introduce a little bit more about herself, but really amazing attachment theory work that she does and puts out in the world, and also incredibly funny, and as my go-to person to watch whenever The Bachelor is on or Love is Blind is on, and she has so much insight that she shares around relational behaviors that we're seeing on TV. And of course, reality shows can be dramatized, but she's really wonderful at teasing apart the tendencies and helping us to better understand our own behaviors in that. So without further ado, and we're gonna dive into the different attachment styles and all that stuff, but I want to bring her in. Hello, Mel. Thank you. Please continue to let us know your names as you're joining in. Okay, I'm gonna find you, Diane. There you are. Okay, so I'm gonna, you know what? Let me see if I can do it like this. There she is. Perfect. Right on time. Turn that down.
Hello there.
Right on time.
Yay. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Good. Yes, I loved your relaxing music you had on in the background.
Aw, thank you. It's my way to calm myself before the live, you know?
I hear you. I hear you.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for being here. I introduced you, but I would love for everyone listening to be able to just hear your own introduction and how you came to love attachment theory work, and just give us a little bit of insight into who you are.
Sure. Sylvie, I'm also of Polish descent.
Ooh.
My last name is Khoucasian.
Okay.
I am a licensed psychologist. I work in Northern California, and I've been doing therapy for 20 years. Long time. But I work with couples, and I also work with singles. And I had found attachment, but then working more with couples and with singles, it was so beautiful to have the theory help to explain the early origins of people's issues. And then to really work with the healing components and figure out what is the attachment wound, and then how to move the person and give them all the empirically validated treatments that are helpful to them. And then quite honestly, I've always just been a fan of The Bachelor. And then I decided to make it my work. I'm like, I love this show. And I think there is so much depth and richness. Yes, that and Love is Blind, because oftentimes we're blind, right? We have our own blind spots. And when we can see it played out in someone else, then we don't take it so personally. And I think there's just so much richness to learn there. So,
and
yeah.
you're so good at it. I mean, you just make it so fun and engaging, and it's just so entertaining in such an educational way.
Thank you. And my personality is a little quirky, and so I like to mix it up. I like to add a little funny. I like my memes, because I think sometimes the best medicine is a good laugh. You know, I think all of this is so heavy and serious at times, and it's helpful to have a little bit of levity.
I couldn't agree more. And it helps to digest the information sometimes a little bit more easily when there's a entertaining or humor-filled approach as well. So
yes,
I love that you bring humor, and it's also such a good reminder to make fun of ourselves too when we start to see our own attachment tendencies, like, you know, here I go, I'm doing this thing again. And to be able to bring that lightness, I think, is such a relationship asset.
Absolutely. And Sylvie, what I appreciate about you too is on this platform, we just have to keep it real. I mean, talking about today and what's happening and the heaviness, if we don't lead the way, right, and talk about what's happening for all of us. I mean, I said the other day, I wrote a post, I thought it was for other people, but it's for me, right? It's like, this is my life too. And it's been challenging, and therapists have had a tough go of it too. It's a lot to carry these days.
Well, that's a great segue into what we were speaking about as we were preparing. Me and Diane spoke a little bit yesterday about how we're experiencing this existential crisis in general, and how that's impacting relationships, whether we're single or we're coupled up. Maybe you can touch on, or we can tag team on this, but the different kinds of scenarios that we're seeing as a result of this existential crisis.
Yes, that's right, Sylvie. As you and I said, you know, what happens is in the middle of a crisis or during grief, right? When you have a death or a loss, it crystallizes everything that's important, right? And so out of that, we realize that life is short. And if life is short, then what does that mean if I'm single? Does that mean I really want a partner now? Am I okay with the life that I'm leaving? Or if I am with a person, if I have already chosen a partner, are you the right person? Right? How are you handling? Can I rely on you during this time? And if I can't, what does that mean? Because life is short. And so I'm seeing people are calling into question their relationships more so now than ever.
you frame that so beautifully. It crystallizes all that is important, right? Like it's like this huge magnifying glass. And we were speaking yesterday about, you know, the variety of things that we're seeing. You mentioned, you know, seeing people that are single that are realizing, wow, I really do want to be in a relationship, or couples that are really, really struggling. And perhaps, like you said, they're struggling to rely on each other, and their attachment wounds are starting to come to surface.
Yep.
And how a lot of couples are even breaking up, and how we were talking about, you know, for some couples, that's exactly what needs to happen, right? This is
Anyway,
out,
yeah.
right? That this is like, finally, I have enough clarity. The red flags are more clear than ever. And for some couples, how, you know, the medicine might be to pause, right?
Yeah. And Sylvie, also just to normalize all the range of emotions that people are having, right? I mean, we all have talked about this, the depression, the anxiety, the worry, the financial stressors, and why attachment theory is so beautiful in this circumstance is it's because it's when we're in hot water or there is a threat that we see the real attachment style, which is we see the needs, right? They're coming out more than ever. Whereas before I could cope and I could go to the gym and I could be with my friends and I could maybe be at work and find a distraction or a boundary. And now I'm in it 24/7. You know, people being asked to homeschool, they didn't plan on that. I mean, the demands are so high.
And it just shows how differently that many of us might be behaving, that can feel very different and even contradictory to how we might show up, like you said, because we're able to cope through and maybe self-regulate and take care of ourselves, and or the complete opposite. Now we're actually reverting. So without further ado, maybe this is a perfect window to, you know, we want to map out the different attachment styles. I like to use the word tendencies because none of us are a box, and you know, I know you're we share this this perspective, and that there's fluidity to these.
Yes.
But we definitely can by paying attention to which tendencies we resonate with most, or even the two that we resonate, or the three that we resonate, we have this ability to work with it, to name it, to really get our hands into beginning to do that healing work. So do you want to start us with the lovely two that we talked about for you and guide us through that, Diane?
Sure. And if people don't know, I do have a love style quiz, and I'm in the middle of changing it because it's called Secure in Love, and I have different titles. But on my Instagram, my characters, and the two that I'm going to talk about, are the anxious person, who I call Nervous Nora or Nervous Nick, because I think it's really your nervous system that is gotten activated, and your nervous system was formed early on in that early relationship with your parents. And that's why I use the word nervous versus anxious, because some people don't necessarily resonate with that word anxious. So should I speak to what they're going through right now?
I would say let's give them a little taste about how they form, and then perhaps just so, because I'm imagining there's some people on here that don't know what attachment theory is.
Perfect.
A little bit of a dive in onto that.
Perfect. So the anxious person or the nervous person would have grown up in a family situation where there was ambiguity and there was inconsistency. So the problem is the child didn't feel completely that they could trust their primary caregiver, because the parent could have been self-absorbed, could have been a workaholic, could have been an alcoholic, could have been having their own anxiety issues. For whatever reason, they couldn't be fully attuned and present to the anxious child. So the child then learns to kind of rev on a high level. And what that looks like in adult attachment is you get connected quickly because you're looking to the other person, you're looking to your romantic partner, who now is like the surrogate to the parent, to regulate with you. So you're kind of co-regulating with this other person, but it could put you in the position of feeling emotionally dependent on them.
Beautifully. And how would you say that's being amplified right now?
Okay, well,
Yeah.
so many of the questions that I got on my page and we all are getting is, what can the anxious person do now? So the anxious person now is cut off. And if you're single, right, and you're asked to socially isolate, you're not getting the feedback that you would get. And the problem is oftentimes you can interpret things as rejection because you're going to look at it, what I say, is through the lens of rejection. So then you look for more evidence to confirm that. And so the work then, of course, is to calm the nervous system and to learn to interpret those things differently, because you may be looking at them through a distorted lens that sees the negative versus the positive. But this is affecting lots of people, single people, people who are at a distance, right?
Yes.
People who are in long distance relationships are feeling incredibly insecure because now they're feeling that there's some kind of new threat, or out of sight, out of mind. That there's this worry that something is going to change. Or I'm even seeing the opposite, where you now start connecting with someone new, or you reconnect with an ex. And then you think, okay, this is good now, but what's going to happen when we're back to the normal? And so it's churning a new kind of anxiety, which is a new kind of worry. But the tendency is to connect too quickly, sometimes to lose one's own power in relationship by being the emotional person, taking too much of the load, and then not leaving anything for yourself, really.
And I imagine can be so intensified for those of us. By the way, I definitely resonate with this one very much.
Yeah.
You know, that people's capacities are just much smaller right now because they're dealing with so much of their own, crisis or financial burdens. So like you said, it's that perception of someone not necessarily being available, not because they don't want to be, but just because of the life circumstances we're going through, and how to then take care of ourselves in the midst of that. It's hard.
Absolutely. And also the big trigger is for even the coupled people, right? So now you're trapped with maybe an avoidant partner, and they're not giving you what you want, right? They're not telling you the things you so desperately want to hear. They're not reassuring you. And you're just getting triggered all over the place. From the news, from your partner, it's, that's the rough part. And I too am nervous, Nora. I'm like, yes. And under stress,
resonate with it.
Of course, it's going to look worse. In my best of times, sure, I'm pretty secure, I'm pretty confident. But under this, it's hard for any of us to be.
Absolutely. And so, what would you say are some things that somebody that's struggling with this? I mean, I think what you just said in itself is so helpful, because you're naming the internal experience and just being able to recognize that, this person may not be available because they have stuff going on. It's not personal. So maybe messages to self-soothe or bring in that loving and kind of protective inner parent of ours. What are some other things that could be helpful right now for someone that has a lot of anxious tendencies?
Well, mindfulness, meditation is just, as we both know, it's really the way to learn to find the breath, to open up the vagus nerve, to calm the body through the breath and meditation. Really, you have to find your own peace in all of that. And I think, I'm going to tell you this, Sylvie, I think actually something wonderful could come out of this. I know we're talking about a crisis, but I think the challenge is, if the anxious person can figure out a way to gain more confidence in their own ability to self-soothe, they're not going to feel so dependent on other people when this is over.
Absolutely. And it's almost like having someone that's always available can sometimes prevent us from learning that self-regulation tool, right? So it's this
That's right.
balance of, yes, I need that other person to co-regulate with, to create this nourishing, mutual balance experience with, but I absolutely also need to learn. And like you said, maybe this challenge of, okay, all these tools that I've been kind of avoiding, not really doing, this is a beautiful opportunity to try one, whether it's 5 minutes of meditating or journaling out my feelings, or belly breaths, like you said, deep breathing. I think that's a really incredible point. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think part of that too is rewriting our narrative. You know, Dan Siegel talks a lot about that, which is like we have the story, right? We have, and sometimes the anxious person has a victim story. And then we look at things from that perspective, that everyone disappoints me, that nobody is really there for me, right? Because inherently we have a distrust issue. And so what could be the antidote to that? Well, creating a new story that you understand, also not that your parents meant to do that to you intentionally. It wasn't their fault. Epigenetics says this is multiple generations. They only did the best that they could. I mean, thank God my mother's not on Instagram, but you know, my mother got it from her mother. And so they all did the best that they could, but they were just modeling. We're just little sponges reacting to that. But if I can step back from all of that and create my new narrative where I have more control and I can, again, self-soothe, and I also don't have to get stuck in it. That's why I think movement is so powerful.
Yes,
right?
I'm so glad you said movement.
So much of the somatic therapy, the body treatment is, I was explaining to a client of mine just this morning, there's even just a little move where you stand up and you kind of sway your arms from side to side while you're breathing. A lot of that gets us activated in a more positively, socially engaged way.
Beautiful. Walking has been the best medicine for me right now. I mean, without it, I just feel like I would be just a hot mess, and just there would be no way to just release that built up anxious energy that is just coming up to the surface.
That's right.
You know,
certain yoga poses are so helpful. Sphinx pose in particular for the ventral vagal, kind of opening up when you're, lying down, opening with the breath. So helpful. But meditation, movement, music, that's therapeutic. Journaling, and then that's sort of the bottom up from inside out. And then there's the cognitive piece too, right? Which
helps a lot.
Soothing one's thoughts, saying, well, wait a minute. Okay, if I presume that this guy is like rejecting me or he's not texting me, that's the watch pot always like looking at the phone. I say, put it down. You're imagining that somebody should be available all the time. That's really a myth. Someone else might need time to themselves, or they might have different boundaries, or they're just not in touch with you. It's time to put that aside because it's just making you more anxious. But realizing that it's not always the interpretation that you have that it's something negative. It could be something that you have no idea about.
So beautiful. I think challenging our interpretations is such a huge piece of healing the attachments, the anxious attachment wound of really, like you said, and you do a lot of work with cognitive behavioral, which is exactly that, right? Helping to challenge negative thoughts. It doesn't have to be a positive thought that's right, perfect, but what's a softer thought? Maybe, am I sure that they're avoiding me? Or maybe they're just busy, or maybe there's just something going on, and being able to just find any mantra or some thought or some statement that you could say to yourself or write down that just helps to bring some kind of soothing to that anxiety.
That's right, because the old thought is I'm not good enough, something's wrong with me, or I'm too needy, right? It's a negative perception, and to say I'm lovable just because I haven't heard from them doesn't mean they don't love me or they don't think I'm important.
So beautiful. Well, why don't we dive into what I kind of think is the flip version of the anxious, which I think we talk a lot about the pairing, which is the dismissive avoidant attachment style. Can you walk us through that?
Okay, or do you want to talk about that type? So
Well, I was going to do the fearful avoidant. And,
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yes.
Is that okay for you?
Yes. No, I'm going to talk about the avoidant, and I call this person independent Ian or independent Isabel. So what do we know about Isabel or Ian? They are the anxious avoidant type. And what does that mean? Well, oftentimes they grew up in a household with less emotional connection. And that means that their parents were there for them physically, but not necessarily emotionally. And so we see families that are just a bit stilted in their communication because that's not really their like love language. Oftentimes, I don't know if you see this, Sylvie, I see people tend to then, their love language, the avoidant type, is more acts of service or more physical.
Exactly. Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Not as much the verbal.
Yep.
Which tends to be the anxious type. So what's happening for them now? Okay, so they didn't learn to be vulnerable. They didn't learn the power of connecting through words. Their motto was be independent at all costs. And they're avoiding certain things, but I call it independent because that is what they fear. They fear that they're going to lose their independence. It is so powerful to them to maintain the independence, but what's hard for them to tolerate is to understand that other people have different needs because they put a value on that. That means I'm strong. I can handle it on my own. But even during these times, we see the independent or the avoidant person does want a connection. Of course they do. We're all wired for love.
Absolutely. And yeah, even the piece about you saying, you know, in the same way that somebody that has strong anxious tendencies starts to create that narrative that I can't trust, I can't depend on someone external. Right. For the independent avoidant type, we're going to be much more concerned about someone coming into our space and losing our own self from that person being so invasive with us, right?
That's exactly right. I'm going to get engulfed by you. Yes. And so what does the independent person need? They need peace. They need space. They can't stand conflict, right? If there's something wrong in the relationship and you're coming at me, then I'm feeling really threatened by that, right? It's like, whoa, too much. You're getting up in my grill. You know, you are, they won't say flooded per se, but it's just too much. And they feel like, somebody had said a post, it's like, now I know when I open the door that my cat or my dog wants to run out, right? It's like, they're just feeling strangled. Mm. And if their way of coping was to have some space and peace, now we put them in quarantine. And even though the joke is like, oh, I've prepared for this my whole life, but when everybody else is there with you, that can feel really crowded.
Absolutely. And it's especially if you're in a relationship in tight quarters with someone, I mean, how to give that person space and peace and time to process their own experience. But you know, we know with people that have avoidant tendencies, they do better in group settings where it's not so one-on-one. Yes. But here's this person one-on-one, and they don't really have the group environment to really bounce off of. So what are some things that we can do if we resonate with this, Diane? Yes.
Well, again, most people like to have some kind of physicality. I would say definitely keep up your workouts. For all the avoidant people, I'd say more than anything, that is going to be your sanctuary. Go for a run if you can. I'm telling people literally, if you need to lock the bathroom door and go take a tub, and you need to carve out some space for yourself. But it's so much more helpful in a relationship to ask permission first.
Got it.
Right? If you are in a relationship, especially with the anxious person, you say, hey, honey, you know, I love you, but I've had too much. I'm going to be so much better, and I'm going to be so much more present to you if I just have some time to myself. I'm going to go for a little bit or watch my show or listen to my music. I don't mean to be drowning you out. I'm just going to listen to my headphones. And so, however, we can create a bit of a barrier, and it's better to ask for it instead of to take it in a resistant way, right?
Or
Better
like a punishing way.
exactly,
Right?
exactly.
Like, I need my alone time, as if like you did something to me that caused me to now need this alone time.
That's exactly right. Because then it feels like a reaction to.
Yes.
And that reinforces the anxious person feeling like I'm too much, right? And now they're getting feedback, I'm too much because I need space from you. Versus if you say, hey, you know, this is just me, I just need more space, then it's a very different conversation. And then your partner could listen to that. So the singles I'm seeing, some of them are doing okay, but you know what they're missing? They're missing the sex,
Physical
right?
touch. Yeah.
They're missing the physical touch. That's a real thing. And, you know, maybe Zoom just doesn't quite do it for you. But so many times the questions I'm getting is, if this is me, how do I come out of myself? What is the challenge, right? Because the anxious, the challenge is to sit with themselves. But now the avoidant, the challenge is to share more. I mean, you and I both watched Love is Blind, and we saw what connections were formed when there was no physicality, right?
Absolutely. Completely different experiences. Absolutely.
And I have to tell you, I am seeing there is definitely a surge of online dating. Online dating is up by 20%.
Wow. Not surprised.
Not surprising, because that's all you have. But now if you don't have great communication skills, you're going to feel really vulnerable. But here's the cognitive piece. You have to ask yourself, how vulnerable am I really being? Because you're just not used to it. You're not in practice with it. But I hear this often. People will say, well, it's kind of like it's going to be used against me. This information is going to be used against me. And I'll have to challenge them, like, how would that be? Is that real? Because what's more likely to happen is you don't share enough. You don't risk enough. And therefore, the connection doesn't happen.
Or oftentimes I see this illusion of vulnerability, like vulnerability, like you said, right? Like I'm kind of even convincing myself that I'm being vulnerable, but then I'm not, like you said, I'm not feeling connected. So that's where we have to start questioning, right? Am I really being authentically vulnerable? Not to share my deepest, darkest traumas on the second date, you know, but
that's right.
Something at stake that can put myself on the line. That's
right. In cognitive therapy, we'd call it emotional reasoning, right? You feel like you're being vulnerable, and therefore you assume you are being vulnerable. But really what you're doing is you're just sharing information. You're just trying to get to know somebody. And I'll also hear the person who, for instance, the avoidant person who doesn't want to flirt, because they'll say, well, I don't want to lead you on, or I don't want to give you false information. Or the person who even says, I'm not interested in a relationship. Though in the back of their mind, if it went really well, they would be open to a relationship. They just don't want to hurt you. And they're so afraid of the conflict that now they're given a mixed message. But why not open your mind, right?
Yes.
To the possibility and see where we go, but we're not going to go anywhere if the person doesn't feel like this is leveled, right? And that's the whole point. It's got to be 50-50. It's got to be a give and take, because the one person who is sharing is going to feel like this is unfair.
One of the things I love suggesting when I work with a client that has more anxious tendencies and loves to share but starts to feel resentful because like they might be dating someone that has avoidant tendencies, again, all the pairings can work as long as both people are willing to become self-aware and do their work to, like you said, find that balance. It's instead of continuing to share, don't do that. You know, share 1 or 2 or 3 things. And if you're not being met, call it out in a loving way. You know, I've been sharing about myself. It feels really good to connect with you in this way and to tell you about myself. I'd really love to know something a little bit deeper about you if you're willing to share that. And in giving them that invitation to see, some people might get a little bit, you know, panicky by that. So our framing matters. Yes. But I do think it's so essential as a way to vet somebody's openness if we're noticing a little bit of that wall.
That's right. So that was a beautiful dialogue that you just had, and that's so important to have. I had a post that I said, we have this idea that like sharing is caring, But sometimes not sharing is caring.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the anxious person has to contain that just a little bit, or you share when the timing is right. Right? You've got to build a foundation of trust first. And at the beginning of a relationship, there's something called matching, right?
Yes.
We both have to kind of like share a little something, get a little something back. So if I'm like on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm treating you like a 7, but you're treating me like a 3. Well, we're not very matched, are we?
Yes. And if we don't say anything, we don't give the person a chance to show up and meet us if they want to.
That's right.
If they don't, it's like, oh, okay, this person really either doesn't have the capacity or is just not really wanting to make effort in this time. But at some point, pulling back to protect ourselves and to not continue to, what's the thing you said at the beginning, to validate that negative self story that we have, oh, then nobody's going to show up for us.
That's right. That's right. Because underneath all of this, whether you're the anxious type or the anxious avoidant type, there is anxiety there, and there's a trust issue. Because when we grew up not completely trusting that someone would love us unconditionally, we're going to come at it from a perspective of distrust. And where we need to move into, right, is to switch that.
And to take those, to speak it in a way where we can assess the trust, right? To kind of be a little bit more proactive instead of feeling like we're the victim, like you said earlier.
That's right. That's right.
So beautiful.
Yeah, so the avoidant has a different narrative that like nobody's really there for me. I should do this on my own. And I would challenge that narrative. I would challenge that narrative to be more interdependent, that there's nothing wrong with it. And there's actually beauty in being able to rely on another person. There's growth.
What a different wiring and healing process that is, to be able to start to shift that narrative just within ourselves, but then to take actions to meet that goal, right? It's not just about now I have this narrative, but what actions do I need to take in order to start risking, leaning, doing something that's a little bit more counterintuitive, that might feel a little foreign, but that's going to potentially get me the kind of experience that I really, really want to have.
That's right. That's right. And during these times, I mean, we all just want someone to be close with, right? I mean, that's the meaning of all of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to dive. Someone just asked about the fearful avoidant.
Yes.
I talked about that a little bit.
Yes.
So the two styles that I wanted to speak into is the secure attachment and the fearful avoidance style. When we're talking about secure attachment, I love this statistic by Ed Tronick, who's a pioneer in our field. He says that in order for a child to feel attuned to properly from a caregiver, it really only has to happen 30% of the time well.
I love it.
Which really gives us so much room for mistakes, for the lack of attunement, for life happening. It doesn't mean that the 70% of the time we're bad parents and we're hurting our children, but that we're a lot more resilient to become secure than we realize. And so when we're talking about secure attachment, it's about that caregiver having that repetitive, consistent experience of tuning into the child needs and responding in a way that's appropriate for what the child needs. If the child needs to be rocked, that's what's happening. Yeah. And if there's mistakes being made, the caregiver is sensitive enough and caring enough to adjust their style and not make that mean something bad about them as a parent or caregiver.
Yeah.
And over time, piggybacking on what Diane said, this is that consistency and attunement is what creates that feeling of trust in our adult relationships. I have reached out and tuned into my experience and presented in a way where I'm being responded to, I matter. It makes me feel safe to express my needs. I have this experience of co-regulating with my caregiver, but with that co-regulating experience, I also now can self-regulate too.
Yes.
And those are beautiful skills that we all want to learn, that self-regulation piece and the co-regulating, which is the relational dynamic. And so people that have more secure tendencies, secure relationship skills, are going to have more resiliency most likely during this time.
More flexibility.
Exactly, more flexibility, more mutuality, more ability to take in the other person's needs just as much as their own, more expressive and communicative. But this is just one theory. There's financial strains, there's so many other
Yes.
things. So, you know, we might have secure tendencies, but we're in a situation where, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's so many other factors that can influence and bring up anxiety and bring up things that we have to take those in consideration too, and not expect so much from ourselves right now.
That's right.
Give ourselves space to make mistakes.
Right. The underlying anxiety is just huge for everyone. But I love that. And I say the same thing, like you have to try. But I think it's so great, Sylvie, what I love about the secure person is that's like a role model.
Yes, exactly.
People need role models. And I say try to feel, think, and act like a secure person would. Like sometimes you have to fake it till you make it, right? You have to act with confidence even though you don't feel it yet. Because it's the same thing with depression. People like say, I'll do it when I'm motivated. You're never going to feel motivated. You're just going to have to do it.
Absolutely. I remember when I was single and couldn't figure out dating, and I just was a mess. And I remember being really drawn to this woman who exuded these beautiful, secure, loving tendencies. Like, she's vulnerable, but she's strong. And I just found myself so drawn to her, wanting to learn from her. And I, you know, the beautiful thing about people that have really strong, secure tendencies is they teach you how to be more secure, but from a place of, they have humility about it. Like you don't feel like you're, what's the way? How would you say this? Can you help me finish my thought, Diane?
Yeah, there's strength in your vulnerability, because I know that I was like verklempt last week and like really upset, and I said I have to show this too, because that's part of like being real, and you don't get so overwhelmed by it. Right? Like you can feel strength in the vulnerability. It's not either or, it's a combination of both.
Beautiful.
In our humanness.
Absolutely. So that's the secure style. Again, people have been asking, can you feel this way with different people? Absolutely. I can be in a relationship with one person that triggers more of my anxiety. I can be in a relationship with someone that's really has incredibly strong avoidant tendencies, and I might find myself feeling super anxious. So we're interdependent and affecting each other. Absolutely. But I do notice from working with people over time that we have a template that we tend to kind of have at default, and you know, that's what's usually really helpful to pay attention to, because we are also going to be drawn to people based on that template. Right. So for the fearful avoidance style, the fearful avoidance style is it's developed when we have a caregiver that, similar to what Diane said about the anxious style, the parent is really experiencing a lot maybe of their own anxieties, but take it up a notch, or maybe 10 notches, you know. Maybe they're struggling with dealing with losing their own parents, or going through their own traumas, or addictions, like major things where they're afraid and dysregulated themselves a lot of times, so they can struggle to be present and help their child with their own regulation. So this child there may be abuse, there may be, or just
serious neglect.
So this intense experience of not having that presence. And there's often both anxious and avoidant tendencies in someone that has the fearful. So a lot of times people ask, I have both, I have a strong of both. There might be some of this experience present. And, you know, for me, it's like, it doesn't matter so much what attachment style we resonate. It's more which tendencies we resonate with. What are the behaviors that are getting in the way? And so there's this push-pull in the fearful avoidance style. I want to be in this relationship, whereas, you know, the avoidance style tends to be more disconnected from that longing and that need for a relationship, even though it's always there, but it's more suppressed. The fearful style has more awareness and wants it, but as soon as they get close, as soon as they start to fall in love or start to feel safe, those feelings of helplessness and dysregulation can start to come up, which makes them want to leave. So it's like this dance. Bring in coronavirus, now we have this hyper activated nervous system, which can activate that push-pull experience.
That's right.
Do you have anything to add to the fearful?
You know, and I call this person the wounded warrior, or I call him confused Connie or confused Connor. And I had a woman ask that question. She's like, I started a new relationship and this guy is great, but now I'm getting nervous and everything is, I'm like looking, there's almost like a sense of self-sabotaging. Because the person just doesn't know how to relax into a relationship, to trust that it's even possible. And they can get angry sometimes and do a lot of pushing back. And I've seen they have to have a really tolerant partner, or they feel shame talking about their own experience. And even though a secure person would be a wonderful partner for them, the shame of talking about these childhood experiences is so heavy. Yes. So to find, and therapy so helpful, to help, right, to help work through this narrative, to find a way to discuss it and to speak to the need. Because the child could have been so arrested in their development that they don't have the languaging, right?
Yes, and that's such an important piece of it, because a lot of times they leave because they don't even know how to articulate or express what's going on. But you feel this, like, if I can't name it, if I can't express it, if I can't integrate it, I can't relate to this person in a way that feels healthy, in a way that feels like I can tolerate it. Yeah. So it's so important for this style, for me in particular, more than any of them, to get that therapeutic support because of that inability to access what's happening internally and to be able to start putting words, making sense of it, and piecing the parts together so that you can share those things in small bits of vulnerability, but also so you recognize that it's not actually about the other person. That this is you. All of us are projecting all of our attachment wounds on our partner, but this one is so excessive that it can feel paralyzing to be in a relationship.
That's right. And Sylvie, your program and your work is so important because the word boundaries is so important here, right? To be able to establish healthy boundaries. And that doesn't mean the boundaries are too high, that you're keeping people out, it's a wall, or too low, that you are allowing everything to happen. Because in the short term, you might be overgiving and you're going to resent that in the end. So it's how to find those energetic middle ground boundaries where you speak to what it is that you need while also being responsive. And that's what's happening with so many people. I'm seeing a lot of couples being triggered by one partner's vigilant, the other isn't. There's a lot of, on top of all the other stuff, there's a lot of triggering things that are happening.
It's such a unique time to have boundaries, right? We need the social distancing that we need to have to protect one another.
Of course.
But we're human and we're in relationships with people we love, and it's so natural to also feel rejected by the very boundary that we intellectually know that we need to have. I know. It's like, wait, this is so just making that part of our experience, validating that for ourselves, validating our partners, you know, especially if we have the tendency to be, like you said, the boundaries are too high, Diane. Recognizing that about ourselves, like, man, sometimes when I'm going internal or I feel like someone's, you know, being invasive or coming into my lane, it's still about me. Yes, the other person could be more, you know, more gentle about their approach and do their own work, but how can I express this boundary while also taking in consideration what's happening for the person?
Yeah, and I think here, like even in a couple of the questions that we had gotten, right? The long distance couples, I'm seeing, you know, some people are just getting so anxious. And I said, you know, can I remind you back in the day, like the Jane Austen period, where they didn't see each other for like a year, and they wrote letters, and they still loved each other. You know, we have this need. It's only now in this current day that, like, 24/7 we should be on and we should be over chatting. Sometimes, I hate to say this, but now after a few weeks, it's like we're talking to everybody and not much has changed, right?
Yeah, well, I'm feeling like I need a break. I need a social media detox. I'm like, I think I just need to go in my own cocoon. So
but
even that can be a lot, you
that's
know?
right. But come back to remember. I literally tell people, remember what you love about each other. Write in your journal. These are the things I love about each other. These are the strengths. Distance itself is not going to break you up.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. And people are people. And to get so worried about that, this is time to have faith. This is.
Beautiful.
This is time to have.
I love that you brought up Jane Austen. I'm such a fan.
But like back in, I mean, I loved, you know, the books and the movies, right? It's like they didn't have a phone.
We had to self-regulate, basically, is what you're saying, Diane. We had to self-soothe and not, you know, not take it as a rejection when just because somebody's not sending a letter on a donkey within 24 hours, right?
That's right. But like, what would you have? You'd have the letter, and you could go back and you could reread it, and that would be soothing to you, right? That you have to then hold on to it.
Well, it forces us to be more creative about different ways that we can self-soothe.
That's right.
I know we only have like 10 minutes left because I started a little bit before 4. Let's dive into some of the questions. I know you talked about a little bit about the long distance experience.
Yes.
You want to dive into that question a little bit more, maybe just frame the question for people to see it?
Well, I think, again, back to don't assume the worst.
Don't assume the worst.
Assume that your partner's there for you, whether they express how much they can miss you or not, right? The anxious person can feel that the avoidant is being cruel. It's like, you're withholding from me. How dare you? You're being mean to me. And I say, they're just not as expressive. That's different than negative behavior. That's different than mean. Okay. Now, having said that, do some work on yourself, and then maybe suggest that instead of having all these little conversations, have one good conversation. Beautiful. Right? And I say, do a happy hour, do a drink date or something. Connect with your person when you don't have as many distractions, and have more quality time. This is what I'm seeing with the single people who are connecting. They're connecting on a deeper level because we have less distractions.
It's beautiful. And I love that, because the little micro points might work for some couples, but especially if we have a lot more of the anxious, that we wanted that deeper quality, richer kind of connection. Whereas having that for half an hour a day to go deep, rather than those kind of more superficial touch points. Again, every couple is going to have different desires and needs, but just paying attention to, you know, what Diane is saying, so that you can recognize what kind of connection is actually more nourishing for me on that deeper level, and that can help to lower my anxiety.
And I think more than anything, what I say is calm down first, because oftentimes the anxious person thinks they're being very clear, but they're leading with it's the tone, right? It's 90% is the nonverbals, it's the tone, and they're not even sure what they want. It just doesn't feel right. So what I say is strip that away, do like a dysfunctional thought record, like what's really going on here? What is it that I really need? And then express it to my partner in such a way that it's very clear. And then say, do you think you can do that? You know, I'd like to hear more from you, or have more quality. Do you think you can from you, or have more quality? Do you think you can do that? It's not just about asking for our needs. It's asking it in a way that the person can hear it, and then getting their buy-in.
It's so important to get the buy-in, and to not assume that just because we have a need that someone is required to meet it. Even in a long-term relationship, it's like we're constantly bringing up agreements and negotiating as our lives change. And again, though, that requires that self-regulation, like you said, calming myself down first in order for me to even be sensitive and aware of my partner's needs as well. Right.
Someone just said request versus demand, and I totally agree that it's really exactly what we say. Or then the independent person who is asking for space, they have to find a way to, again, ask for that. To politely say, you know, this isn't about you, this is about me, I need more, or whatever that is. But despite the stress, we are now required to dig deep into our best communication skills possible.
Especially when if we're well, for everybody, but virtually dating, it's like it's this beautiful challenge, right? That if we don't do this in a way that's mutually beneficial, we're going to potentially lose out on this opportunity, you know. So really checking in with, because a lot of the thing that I notice about when we have attachment woundings, we become very self-focused, right?
Yes.
My needs. So for someone that's more anxious, I need you to take care of me, regulate me. For someone that's avoidant, I need you to leave me alone, give me my space, you know. But it's not mutually sensitive. We're taking care of our needs. That's, you know, one of the biggest problem I have with boundaries, and when it can be so rigid, is that it can feel very one-sided, and
Yes.
it's not doing this mutual loop of really taking care of the other person's needs, even if it's just a little bit. You know, your partner might still be upset or disappointed they're not going to hang out with you, but acknowledging that you care, that you understand, and you're validating their experience, it just creates such a beautiful partnership.
And I think it's not just also talking, it's listening, because I think behind every embedded complaint is a need. And if you can really be compassionate to your partner during this time, recognizing we're all in hot water, we're all babies, we're all, meaning that we all were infants, that we learned this somewhere, we're not trying to be intentional, like take the intention out of it. You need to think the best about your partner. You need to accept part of them and to appreciate they're doing the best that they can. And if you don't see it as like a direct insult, then you can just kind of take that in. And I also want to say, don't make a permanent long-term decision about someone during this period of stress.
Yes, could not agree more with that, especially if you've been with someone for a really, really long time.
That's
and
right.
Things are surfacing that you might not have had the space or the energy to really process and work through. And
that's right.
You know, right now it's in crisis mode.
That's right, because it's an impulse. And so I say, if we could all just slow down, work on ourselves, but not just your talking skills, your listening skills. And the negotiation between you and your partner, appreciating and accepting that they're different than you. That doesn't make it bad.
Beautifully said, Diane. Well, I think this is a good place to end. I know we had some more questions, but I might have to just convince you to come back on so we could just do a Q&A.
Or I'll do more questions on mine. Yes, I'd love to. I'd love to, Sylvie. It's so wonderful.
Oh, Diane. Is there anywhere that, I know Diane has a really incredible attachment style quiz on her page. Are there any other resources or workshops or anything? Are you doing one-on-one sessions? Tell us.
You know, I'm working on it right now, Sylvie. I'm revamping my website. It's going to be Back to Love, and I'm working on a course, but I don't have it yet. I will announce it on my page.
Beautiful.
So,
okay.
yes.
So any one-on-ones? Are you doing any offering?
If you're in California,
okay.
Because that's where my license is. So I am doing teletherapy in California. Yes.
Beautiful. So they can. What's the best way to reach you?
Just DM me on my page.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Diane. I'm
you.
definitely going to be saving this, you guys. I will post it on my channel. I mean, such an incredibly delicious and delightful conversation. Thank you so much, Diane.
And stay safe.
You too. All of you guys.
Yes, and healthy.
Thank you all for being here.
Yes.
For your questions and your engagement. Really, really appreciate you guys.
Yes. Hearts
we'll
to
be back.
Yay, I'll be back.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.